So, I'm pretty sure my husband has a whole second life, and am kind of just in shock right now. I've lived in the same house for 24 years. It's a suburb outside Chicago where the HOA is insane. Everything has to be this specific shade of beige, and if your grass is an inch too long, they're on you. I spent 20 years making sure the coasters are where they belong, and the place looks right. My husband Richard is a corporate consultant. Basically, Hez always at an airport or some hotel. When he does come home, he acts like Hez the only one who's exhausted. He doesn't really ask how I'm doing. It's usually just, where's my blue tie? Or did you call the vac guy yet? I've been a dental hygienist for 30 years. It's a steady job, but it's kind of a blur at this point. I spend all day leaning over people's mouths, scraping tartar. Patients talk to me, but it's not like they're really talking to me. I'm just part of the equipment, like the suction tool. They tell me about their kids or some vacation, and I just nod along around mid-August. Richard started acting weird with his phone. Nothing huge, but he'd tilt the screen away from me. He started staying late for quarterly reviews or whatever. I told myself I was being paranoid in 58. I didn't want to be that cliché wife suspecting an affair. It felt embarrassing, so I figured he was just stressed. About 3 weeks ago, we were in the living room with the TV on. Richard was scrolling on his phone with this little smile. I asked what was so funny, and he didn't even look up. He just goes, "It's work, Sarah. Why are you staring at me?" I didn't even answer. I went to the kitchen and started putting dishes away. Just trying to breathe, I'm tired. Not like long shift tired, but something else. I've spent 30 years keeping everything together. Birthdays, insurance, the kids who are all in their own places in the city now. I spent so much time on everyone else that I don't even know what I want for dinner most nights. I make whatever's easiest. In my 30s and 40s, I thought this was just what stability looked like. I thought not fighting was a good thing. I basically became his unpaid assistant. I did everything, so he didn't have to think about anything, and I thought that's what a good marriage was. Last Friday, Richard left for a 3-day trip to Atlanta. He was in such a rush he forgot his iPad on the nightstand. I went to plug it in, and I saw a small leather book tucked under the edge of the mattress. I didn't open it right away. I actually went to the kitchen to clean out the junk drawer because the smoke detector started chirping at 3 a.m. and I needed batteries. The drawer was a mess. Just old takeout menus and paper clips and expired coupons. I spent 20 minutes sorting through it and got actually annoyed that Richard won't throw anything away. I found an oil change coupon from 2018 and threw it in the trash kind of hard. Once I found the batteries, I went back to the bedroom. The house was quiet. I sat on the bed and picked up the book. My heart wasn't racing or anything, it was just this cold feeling, like it's about to rain. I opened it to the middle. It wasn't a diary. It was a list of dates, names, and dollar amounts. There were hotels I've never been to, and restaurants in the city that are way too expensive for a business lunch. He had notes in the margins shorthand, affectionate stuff he hasn't said to me in 20 years. I flipped through the pages, looking at that handwriting. He'd been keeping track of how much he was spending on another life. A second budget. A separate account for a woman he called S. I sat there looking at the beige walls. I thought about our 401k and the plan to enter Florida with a beach house and a golf cart. All those hours I spent scrubbing floors and polishing teeth just to keep this middle-class life looking stable. I put the book back under the mattress. Right where I found it, I didn't want him to know yet. I barely slept that night. The next day I ended up in the hallway closet one with the holiday decorations and old tax returns. I don't know why, I just felt like I needed to find something that reminded me I actually exist outside of this house. I started digging through boxes of fake snow and ornaments. At the back of the closet, behind some winter blankets and a broken vacuum, I found a small metal lockbox. It was old and rusted. It wasn't Richard's too organized for that. I pulled it out, and since the latch was cheap, I used a screwdriver from the kitchen to pop it open. Insides were some letters, a faded photo of a man I didn't recognize, and a heavy gold ring. It wasn't from my family. I just stared at it while the house stayed quiet. I 48F think my husband 52M has a whole other life. I'm shaking while typing this, but I need advice. Richard got back on Monday afternoon. He has this way of walking in the door, like he's the only person in the house who actually accomplishes anything. He just dropped his suitcase right in the middle of the hallway, always blocks the path to the coat closet and didn't even say sorry. He just stood there loosening his tie and complaining about how the traffic from O'Hare was a total nightmare. I was in the kitchen. Still had that gold ring from the lockbox in my pocket. I still don't know who the guy in the photo was or where the ring came from, but it just felt wrong. It was way too fancy for my life. I've been a dental hygienist and a suburban wife for 24 years. I don't own jewelry like that. Did you call the vac guy? Richard asked. He didn't kiss me. He just leaned over the counter to look at the mail. I did. I said I sounded kind of shaky. He's coming Thursday. He just grunted, said something about how local contractors are useless, and started unloading his laptop bag. I just watched him. I looked at the back of his neck and his hair, which is always trimmed perfectly, and I thought about that leather book under the mattress. I wondered if he was thinking about S while he was complaining about the traffic. Or if he'd spent the weekend in some hotel in Atlanta that didn't smell like the cleaning supplies I use on the furniture. I didn't say anything at first. I made him a turkey sandwich on rye, the way he likes it, and just watched him eat. He didn't even notice I wasn't talking. Usually, I'm the one filling the silence. I'll tell him about a patient having a panic attack, or some notice the hoa scent about the mulch. But I stood there for a minute, leaning against the dishwasher. You're being quiet, he said. He didn't look up from his phone. Something wrong. I found a book, I told him. Under the mattress. He went still. Not like he jumped, but just stopped. It's the way he looks when a client asks a question he can't answer during a presentation. He slowly put the sandwich down. What book? The leather one, with the dates and the names and the money. Richard let out this short, dry laugh. He finally looked at me, and he looked genuinely confused. I realize now he was probably acting, but at the time I actually believed him. Lay, what are you talking about? I don't have a leather book. It's under the mattress, Richard. I saw it. I read it. He stood up and walked toward the bedroom. I followed him, and my heart was just thumping. He reached under the mattress, pulled the book out, and held it up. He didn't even open it. He just stared at it for a second and then looked at me with this look of pity. It's just work stuff, Lee. Client codes, he said. His voice was all calm and soothing. The dollar amounts are just projected spends. Why would you think this is something else? There are notes in the margins, I whispered. Things like thinking of you. You don't write that in a work ledger, he sighed, this long, loud sound. He stepped closer to me, kind of crowding my space. Lee, you've been under a lot of stress, your mother's health, the kids being gone. I think you're starting to imagine things. You're just bored. It happened so fast. 1 second he's confused, the next he's acting like my caregiver. He wasn't yelling. He was talking to me like I was a patient who didn't understand why they needed a root canal. He told me I was tired. He said my memory had been spotty. He actually asked if I'd been taking my vitamins. I stood there for a minute. For a second, I actually wondered if I was wrong. That's the thing. When you're the one who handles everything, you get used to doubting yourself because you spend all your time making sure everyone else is okay. I'd spent years just absorbing his moods, not imagining it, I said, but I didn't sound like I believed it. Go lie down, he said, and he patted my shoulder. I'll handle dinner, just relax. He took the book, put it in his briefcase, and locked it. He didn't look at me again for the rest of the night. I went to the living room and just sat on the sofa. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just sat there. Later, I went to the pantry to get some tea. While I was reaching for the chamomile, I noticed the garbage disposal was making this gross gurgling sound. I spent 10 minutes trying to fish out a piece of trapped celery with some tongs, and I was just getting so frustrated that the thing always clogs when I am already exhausted. I ended up splashing dishwater all over my slippers. I stood there for a minute, looking at my wet feet. When Richard finally fell asleep, I waited until his breathing was heavy and rhythmic. Then I quietly got out of bed. I didn't go for the briefcase because it was by the door and the lock would be too loud. I went for his iPad. He left it on the charger in the kitchen. He's lazy with passwords, so he uses the same pattern for everything. I tried our anniversary, nothing. Then I tried the date of his first big promotion. It opened. I didn't check messages first. I went straight to the banking apps. I've always handled the bills, but the big stuff, the 401k, the savings, the brokerage accounts, that was always his thing. He said it was easier if one person managed the growth. I trusted him. We had the nice house and the plan for Florida. Why wouldn't I trust him? I found a second account. It wasn't on any of our joint statements. It was a high-yield savings account at a bank I'd never heard of. I scrolled through it, and my breath just caught. There were transfers of $3,000 every month for the last 4 years. There were jewelry stores in the city, stuff that never made it to my jewelry box. Flights to places he called corporate retreats. Hotel stays at the Ritz-Carlton. On the same weekends, he said he was working late on quarterly reviews. I sat on the kitchen floor, the cold tile pressing through my pajamas, and just looked at the numbers. It wasn't just an affair. He was just skimming off our future to pay for another life. I thought about my 30 years as a dental hygienist, all those hours leaning over people, the ache in my back, my wrists throbbing at night. I worked every shift, took every bit of overtime, thinking we were building something secure together. I was the quiet wife. I made sure the coasters were out and the vac was serviced. I felt something cold in my chest. I wasn't even angry yet, it was just a weird clarity. I realized I've basically just been his unpaid housekeeper for 20 years. I remembered an argument we had. I think it was a Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, back in October 2012. I wanted to go back to school for a specialty certification. I told him it would mean more pay and more autonomy. He gave me that same pitying look and told me it wasn't necessary. He said our life was comfortable and I should just focus on keeping the home a sanctuary. I listened to him. I stayed in my lane. I took a photo of the account balance with my phone. Then I took photos of the last 6 months of transactions. I didn't take any money, I just wanted the proof, so I knew I wasn't crazy. As I was getting up, I saw my reflection in the dark window over the sink. I looked old. Not like a senior citizen, just exhausted. There were lines around my eyes that weren't there 10 years ago. My shoulders were slumped. I went back to the bedroom and climbed into bed, trying not to wake him. I lay there in the dark, listening to him snore, and thought about the gold ring in my drawer. I didn't know whose it was, but I liked that it existed. I liked that there was something in the house he didn't know about. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and started doing the math. I thought about the HOA, the mortgage, and the way traffic jams up at 8 a.m. I remembered I needed to go to Target tomorrow for laundry detergent. I decided I'd keep playing the part for a bit. I'll be the tired wife, the one who imagines things ill, make the turkey sandwiches and call the walk guy. But I wasn't thinking about Florida anymore. I was thinking about how much it would cost to hire a really aggressive divorce lawyer in the city. I wonder if they take consultations on Tuesday mornings. I'll probably just go during my lunch break. So this all started on Tuesday. Just a normal, boring-ass Tuesday. I woke up at 6 and the light coming through the curtains was all washed out. Richard was already in the shower. He could hear the pipes humming. I stood in the kitchen waiting for the coffee, staring at the smudge on the granite I'd missed the night before. It was one of those greasy streaks that just wouldn't lift, no matter how hard I scrubbed. I actually spent a good 2 minutes trying to buff it out with a paper towel, but it just smeared. I think I used the wrong cleaner. The neighborhood was quiet, except for some guy using a leaf blower. I think the HOA sends warnings if you do that too early. Wait, was it 7th night? No, probably 6:30. I don't even know why I used to care about that. There was a time when I liked the order of it all, having the hedges squared off. Now it seems like a really expensive way to live in a box. Richard came into the kitchen in his work suit, smelling like that expensive soap he uses. He didn't really look at me. He poured some coffee. Late meeting in the city today, he said. Don't wait up. He wasn't apologizing, he was just telling me. I nodded and buttered some toast. I didn't ask where the meeting was or who was there. I didn't want him to know I was suspicious, especially since he'd spent so much time trying to make me think I was losing it. Right, I said. I've got a full schedule. Mrs. Gable is coming in for a deep cleaning, he grunted and left. As soon as the garage door slammed, the house got really quiet. I stayed put for a minute, then went into the bedroom and grabbed his iPad. I was kind of detached. I'm usually the person who follows the rules, privacy, and all that, but the marriage was already dead. I just hadn't seen the evidence yet. I checked the browser history first. He'd cleared most of it, but he forgot about the synced accounts on the cloud. I found a folder called Project S. My heart didn't even race, I was just cold. There were photos in there. Not the typical affair stuff, like blurry hotel selfies. These were photos of a home, a condo in the Gold Coast area of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, white marble, a lake view that probably cost a fortune. There were pictures of furniture, too. A navy velvet sofa, a mid-century dining table, and some abstract art that looked like a red ink splash. And then there were the photos of her. Her name was Sophia. I saw it in a digital lease agreement he'd saved as a PDF. She looked younger, maybe 35. She had that look you get when you have a lot of money. In the photos, she was laughing with a glass of champagne, wearing a silk robe. The beauty part didn't even hurt. It was the domestic stuff. There were photos of a grocery list on a fridge. Notes about a trip to Napa Valley. There was even a picture of a dog, a little, white French, bulldog curled up on that navy sofa. Richard hates dogs. He spent 20 years telling me dogs are unhygienic and too much work. But apparently, he's fine with one if it's in another house. I sat on the edge of the bed and scrolled. I felt sick. He hadn't just found someone to sleep with, he'd built a second life. A whole other home. A place where he could be sophisticated and adventurous. In our house, he was just the tired corporate guy who complained about the vac repairman. In that condo, he was the romantic. I was the utility. I was the one who made sure the insurance was paid and the coasters were in the right spot. So he had a stable place to come back to while he played house with Sophia. I spent an hour going through his emails. I found a thread from 6 months ago where he told her how stifling his home life was. He said he felt like he was living in a museum, and that she was the only thing that made him feel alive. I looked around our bedroom. Neutral walls, neutral carpet, neutral curtains. ID spent 20 years making this place comfortable for him. I did everything he wanted. I gave up my own taste so he never felt unsettled, and he used that stability to call me boring. I remember back in the early 2000s, or maybe it was 2002. I wanted to paint the guest room a deep teal. I remember the fight. Richard told me a dark color would make the room feel smaller and ruin the resale value. He said it was impractical. So I painted it warm sand instead. I got up and went to the kitchen. I needed to do something with my hands. I noticed the hinge on the cabinet above the microwave was sagging and the door wouldn't close. I spent 15 minutes trying to tighten the screw with a butter knife because I couldn't find the right screwdriver. The screw just kept spinning in the wood, and I actually got kind of angry, almost to tears, because the door wouldn't stay shut. I just kept thinking about how the wood was too soft, just cheap particle board that couldn't hold a single screw. I ended up jamming a piece of folded cardboard into the gap to hold it in place. It looked terrible, but it worked. Once I calmed down, I went back to the iPad. I found the financial records. He didn't just rent the condo, he owned it. He'd used a shell company to buy it 3 years ago, using money from accounts he told me were low-yield investments. The math was crazy. He'd skimmed hundreds of thousands of dollars. While I was worrying about the cost of new tires for the minivan or the dishwasher, he was building a real estate portfolio for another woman. I thought about all the times I stayed up late helping him with presentations or handling the kids' school stuff alone so he could focus on his career. I did all the heavy lifting for him to get to the top, and then he decided I was an eyesore. I wondered if Sophia even knew about me. Did she know her house was paid for by a dental hygienist in the suburbs? Or did he tell her I was some distant relative or a cold marriage he was trapped in, probably the trapped thing? That's how they always play it. I left for work at 8:30. The drive was the same as always, traffic on I-290, the same billboards for injury lawyers. At the office, I went through the motions. I scraped tartar, polished teeth, and listened to people talk. Mrs. Gable spent 20 minutes telling me about her granddaughter's ballet recital. Normally, I would have smiled and asked questions. Today, I just nodded. I looked at her gums, slightly inflamed, yellowed teeth, and it hit me that I've spent 30 years looking into people's mouths, focusing on tiny imperfections while my own life was a mess. During my lunch break, I didn't eat. I sat in my car and made a call. Hello, this is the office of Marcus Thorne. How can I help you? I am looking for a consultation, I said. My voice sounded thin. I need a divorce attorney who specializes in high asset division and hidden accounts. The secretary asked some questions and I answered. I gave her a rough estimate of our assets and mentioned the secondary properties. I could hear her tone change. Suddenly, I wasn't just some suburban wife. I was a high-value case. Mr. Thorne has an opening Thursday at 11 a.m., she said. I'll be there, I replied. I sat in the silence of my car for a long time. I felt a weird sense of relief. I finished my shift and went home. Richard was already there in the living room, reading a report, looking like the perfect husband. How was your day? He asked without looking up. Fine, I said. Mrs. Gable had some gingivitis. He said. I went to the kitchen and made roast chicken and carrots. I made sure the carrots were sliced evenly. I set the table with the good napkins. I did everything exactly the way done it for 24 years. As I served the food, I watched him. The way he chewed, the way he wiped his mouth, the way he checked his phone every few minutes, he looked so ordinary. It was almost funny. This man thought he was some mastermind, but he was just a middle-aged guy in a suit who couldn't even remember to put his suitcase in the closet. You're very quiet tonight, he said, still feeling a bit off. He was doing it again. The concerned husband act. He wanted me to admit I was struggling so he could stay in control. I'm just tired, Richard. I said. I gave him a small, tight smile. Long day at the office. Well, try to get some rest. You're looking a little worn out lately. He said it so casually, like he was talking about the weather. I felt something hot in my chest. He'd spent years turning me into this quiet shadow, and now he was criticizing me for it. After dinner, I cleaned the kitchen. I scrubbed the pots until they shone and put everything in its spot. As I was finishing, I looked at that piece of cardboard I'd jammed into the cabinet hinge. It was small and ugly, but it was the only thing in the house that felt honest. It was just a makeshift fix for something broken. I went upstairs and lay in bed, listening to the neighborhood quiet down. I thought about Sophia in her marble condo with her white dog. I wondered how she'd feel if she knew her lifestyle was built on the back of a woman who spends her days scraping tartar. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't even hate her, I was just bored. What he did was so cliché, it barely had an impact. I closed my eyes and imagined the look on Richard's face when Marcus Thorne served him the papers. I imagined him trying to explain the Project S folder. I imagined him realizing that the boring wife had been keeping her own ledger. I didn't cry. I just lay there in the dark listening to him breathe, and I felt a strange cold distance. I realized I didn't want the beach house in Florida. I didn't want the golf cart or the retired life we'd planned. I wanted a place where the walls weren't some neutral shade of nothing. I wanted a place where I could paint the rooms teal if I felt like it, and where I didn't have to worry about what some future buyer thought. I fell asleep thinking about that gold ring in my drawer. I still don't know where it came from or who the man in the photo was, but I decided I was keeping it. It was a secret. And for the first time in 24 years, I realized I actually liked having one. Wednesday was just one of those miserable, drizzly days where the driveway becomes a giant slip and slide. I woke up at 5:45, which is basically what I've done for the last 30 years. Richard was already gone. He just left a note on the kitchen island saying he had an early breakfast meeting with some people from the West Coast. He didn't say where it was or when he'd be back. Just a note. I stood in the kitchen and watched the rain and started thinking about Sophia. Like, does she wake up in a bed with better sheets than ours? Does she get notes on a marble counter too? I wasn't even really jealous, I guess. I was just curious. It felt like I was watching a documentary about some stranger. I spent the first hour doing the usual stuff to keep the house from falling apart: laundry, dishwasher, wiping the counters. I was just going through the motions. But my head was already downtown at Marcus Thorne's office. The drive from the suburbs into Chicago is usually a nightmare, but I-90 was actually clear for once. I kept the radio off. I didn't want music or the news, I just wanted to hear the windshield wipers. As the skyline came into view, I felt this weird shift. For 24 years, the city was just where Richard went to be important. I only ever went for holiday shopping or those fancy dinners where the portions are tiny and the prices are offensive. Now it felt like, I don't know, like I was actually doing something for once. Thorne's office is in one of those glass towers. The lobby smelled like fancy cologne and filtered air. The receptionist gave me a polite, practiced smile, the kind of smile I'd give patients when they're terrified of the drill dull. Ms. Anderson, Mr. Thorne is ready for you. His office was huge. He had this mahogany desk that probably cost more than my first car. Marcus Thorne is in his 60s, silver hair, perfect suit. He wasn't the type to do the hugging or comforting thing. He just shook my hand and pointed to a chair. Tell me everything, he said. And let's start with the money. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos of the second bank account. The transfers, the jewelry store charges, the lease for the Gold Coast condo. I told him about Project S and the shell company. I kept my voice flat like I was reporting a patient's gum recession. I didn't cry. I just gave him the facts. Thorne looked at the photos. He didn't seem surprised, just interested. Your husband has been pretty creative, he said. The shell company suggests he wasn't just hiding an affair. He was shielding assets. He's been planning an exit, or at least a safeguard, for a long time. How long? I asked. Based on these transfers, at least 3 or 4 years. Maybe longer if there are other accounts. I just sat there, 3 or 4 years. While I was worrying about health insurance, or the kids' college funds, he was draining our future to build a playground for someone else. I thought about all the times he told me we needed to tighten our belts, or that a vacation was outside the budget. What happens now? I asked. Look, if we file now, he's just going to move every cent he can into accounts we can't find, Thorne said. He'll hide cash and probably try to make you look unstable, which, based on what you said about his comments on your memory, he's already starting to do. That actually gave me a chill. He was already setting that up. We don't let him know you were here, Thorne continued. You go back home, be the supportive, quiet wife, make the sandwiches, call the vac guy. Meanwhile, I'll hire a forensic accountant to trace every penny. Once we have the full map, we hit him, we freeze the assets, file for divorce, and ask the court for a bigger share because of the fraud. Will that work? In court? Yes. Richard thinks Hez the smartest man in the room because Hez spent 20 years convincing you that. You're just the help, but he made a mistake. He underestimated the person who knows where everything is kept. I left the office feeling weirdly light. I didn't go home right away. I drove over to the Gold Coast and found the building from the photo sleek, modern with a doorman. I didn't go in. I just parked across the street and stared up at the windows. Somewhere up there, Sophia was living in a world Richard bought for her with my hard work. I imagine the navy velvet sofa and the white French bulldog. It's weird knowing the money for her lake view came from a woman who spends her days scraping tartar off the teeth of people who don't even remember her name. I stayed there for 20 minutes, just watching people walk by. I had this sudden urge to go up there and scream, or break the marble counters, or throw that sofa off the balcony. But I didn't. I just put the car in gear and drove back to the suburbs. When I got home, the house felt fake. The neutral walls, the beige paint in the guest room. The hedgesit was all just scenery. I wasn't a character in the play anymore. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen. I decided to make a pot roast, since that takes a long time and makes the house smell like a normal home. While the meat was searing, I realized I needed a stamp to mail something to my sister. I went into the junk drawer, the one where everything ends up. I started digging through it and found a stack of old pizza coupons for a place that closed in 2015, some dead batteries, and a few rubber bands that had all dried out and snapped. Actually, I think one of the rubber bands was still sticky, just completely deformed. It's infuriating how these drawers just collect garbage that serves no purpose, and I'm the only one who ever has to sift through it. I found a pen that had leaked all over a handful of receipts from 3 years ago, just blue ink everywhere. I stood there for 10 minutes just staring at the clutter. I got this intense, irrational frustration that Richard never touches this drawer. He never has to find a stamp or a battery. He just exists in the clean spaces, while I'm the one dealing with the junk. I ended up throwing the whole pile of coupons in the trash with a loud thud. Richard came home around 6:30. He dropped his briefcase on the entryway table and almost knocked over a vase of lilies I'd bought last week. Long day, he groaned. He didn't look at me. The West Coast team is a disaster. They can't coordinate a lunch order, let alone a merger. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. I kept my voice smooth. Dinner's almost ready. He finally looked at me. You look better today. Did you sleep? I did, I lied. I feel more rested. Good. I was worried you were having another one of your episodes. You've been so scattered lately. He used that pitying tone, the one that used to make me doubt myself. Now it just sounded pathetic. He was trying so hard to keep up the idea that I was the fragile one. He didn't realize that the scattered version of me was the only thing keeping him safe. During dinner, he talked about his day. Projected spends, corporate bureaucracy, all that. I listened and nodded in the right places. I asked about his boss. I played the predictable wife so well that he actually seemed to relax. He leaned back in his chair, totally unaware that his life was being mapped out by a man in a glass tower downtown. I was thinking, Richard said, wiping his mouth. Maybe we should look into that Florida property again. I think it's time we actually committed. I'm tired of this weather. I looked at him. He was talking about a future that didn't exist. A retirement where I'd just be the one managing the golf cart and the beach towels while he plays the successful patriarch. That sounds lovely, Richard, I said. I almost laughed out loud. I'd love to see the listings again. After dinner, I cleaned the kitchen. I scrubbed the roast pan with a heavy-duty sponge, focusing on the burnt fat. I liked the scrubbing. I wanted everything clean. As I was putting the pots away, I noticed the dishwasher was leaking a little from the bottom corner. I knelt on the floor and poked the soapy water. I didn't call a repairman. I just took a towel, soaked it up, and pushed the machine back an inch to see if it was unlevel. I spent 15 minutes on the floor, knees aching, just staring at the underside of the appliance. It was an old model, maybe 15 years old. Wait, was it 12? No, definitely 15. It was starting to fail, and honestly, I didn't really care. I went upstairs and climbed into bed. Richard was already on his phone. The blue light made his face look ghostly. Turn that thing off, I said softly. You'll give yourself a headache. Just one more email. He muttered. I lay there in the dark, listening to his thumb click against the glass. I thought about Marcus Thorne and the forensic accountant, the shell company, and the Navy's sofa. I remembered a trip we took maybe mid-August of 2005. We went to a bed and breakfast in Vermont. I found this hand-carved wooden box at an antique shop that I loved. It was simple, dark cherry wood. When I asked if I could buy it, Richard told me it was a waste of money. He said we had plenty of boxes at home, and it didn't serve a practical purpose. I didn't buy it. I remember walking away, feeling that sharp sting of disappointment, and telling myself he was right. That practicality was more important than beauty. I realize now that my entire marriage had been an exercise in practicality. I'd sacrificed my tastes and my identity just to make his life easier. I was just the one, making sure everything ran smoothly for him. I closed my eyes and imagined his face when he'd finally see the evidence. Not the confused look he had when I found the leather book, but actual terror. I wanted to see the moment he realized the boring wife had been the one in control all along. The next few days were just acting normal. I went to work, cleaned the house, and went to an HOA meeting on Friday evening. It was 2 hours of people arguing about fence heights and what shade of beige was acceptable for front porches. I sat in the back of the community center, listening to my neighbors complain, and I felt like I was watching a movie in a language I didn't speak anymore. Mrs. Gable was there. She spent 10 minutes complaining about a new stop sign that slowed down her commute. I looked at her and wondered if she had a secret too. I wondered if every woman in this suburb was hiding a second life in a drawer or a hidden account in a glass tower. When I got home, Richard was in the living room with a scotch. The HOA meeting was a circus, wasn't it? He asked. It was, I said. They're really worried about the fences. Ridiculous, he sighed. The level of pettiness in this neighborhood is staggering. I smiled. It was a small, tight smile. It really is. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept the gold ring. I held it up to the light. It was heavy, the gold deep and rich. I still didn't know who it belonged to or who the man in the photo was, but the ring had become a thing for me. A piece of something that didn't fit into the beige world. It was a secret. I put it on, it was a bit too large and slid around my knuckle. I looked at myself in the mirror. The dental hygienist with the tired eyes and slumped shoulders, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like I finally had some leverage. I'd spent the next weekend gathering more evidence. I waited for Richard to go to the gym and went through his laptop. I found more document stacks returns that didn't match the ones he showed me, and payments to a law firm in the city that wasn't Thorne's. He was setting up a trust. He was moving money into a trust that probably named Sophia as a beneficiary. He wasn't just cheating, he was removing me from the financial record of his life. I didn't panic, I just felt numb. Every document was just more ammunition for Thorne. I took photos of everything and saved PDFs to a hidden cloud account. I was building a dossier of everything he did. On Sunday evening, we sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. It was getting dark. I think we should book the flights for Florida for next month, Richard said. Just a scouting trip. See which properties are actually worth the investment. That sounds like a great idea, I replied. He reached over and patted my hand. It was supposed to be affection, but it felt more like he was marking his territory. I'm glad. You're feeling more like yourself. Lee, I was worried for a while. You just need to relax more, stop overthinking things. I looked at the horizon, where the rooftops met the dark sky. I thought about the forensic accountant digging through Richard's shell companies. I thought about the legal trap closing around him. I'm not overthinking anything, Richard, I said. I'm actually feeling very clear. He didn't notice my tone. He just took a sip of his drink and started talking about the real estate market. I listened, and I felt a strange, quiet peace. I wasn't the ghost in the house anymore. I wasn't a piece of furniture he forgot to dust. I was the one who knew where everything was hidden, and I had the map. As the sun disappeared and the yard went into shadow, I realized I didn't want the beach house, and I didn't want the retirement we'd planned. I just wanted the feeling of this moment, the silence, the secrecy, and the certainty that I was no longer waiting for my life to begin. I went inside to start the dishwasher, and for the first time in 24 years, I didn't care if it leaked.